Chapter 3. The End of the Master Builder. Among three different kinds of problems in the world, the simple, the complicated, and the complex. Simple problems, they note, are ones like baking a cake from a mix. There is a recipe. Sometimes there are a few basic techniques to learn. But once these are mastered, following the recipe brings a high likelihood of success. Complicated problems are ones like sending a rocket to the moon. They can sometimes be broken down into a series of simple problems. But there is no straightforward recipe. Success frequently requires multiple people, often multiple teams, and specialized expertise. Unanticipated difficulties are frequent. Timing and coordination become serious concerns. Complex problems are ones like raising a child. Once you learn how to send a rocket to the moon, you can repeat the process with other rockets and perfect it. One rocket is like another rocket. But not so with raising a child, the professors point out. Every child is unique. Although raising one child may provide experience, it does not guarantee success with the next child. Expertise is valuable but most certainly not sufficient. Indeed, the next child may require an entirely different approach from the previous one. And this brings up another feature of complex problems: their outcomes remain highly uncertain. Yet we all know that it is possible to raise a child well. It's complex, that's all. Thinking about averting plane crashes in 1935, or stopping infections of central lines in 2003, or rescuing drowning victims today, I realized that the key problem in each instance was essentially a simple one, despite the number of contributing factors. One needed only to focus attention on the rudder and elevator controls in the first case, to maintain sterility in the second, and to be prepared for cardiac bypass in the third. All were amenable, as a result, to what engineers call forcing functions, relatively straightforward solutions that force the necessary behavior solutions like checklists. We are besieged by simple problems. In medicine, these are the failures to don a mask when putting in a central line, or to recall that one of the 10 causes of a flatline cardiac arrest is a potassium overdose. In legal practice, these are the failures to remember all the critical avenues of defense in a tax fraud case, or simply the various court deadlines. In police work, these are the failures to conduct an eyewitness lineup properly, forgetting to tell the witness that the perpetrator of the crime may not be in the lineup, for instance, or having someone present who knows which one the suspect is. Checklists can provide protection against such elementary errors. Much of the most critical work people do, however, is not so simple. Putting in a central line is just one of the 178 tasks an ICU team must coordinate and execute in a day. ICU work is complicated, and are we really going to be able to create and follow checklists for every possible one of them? Is this even remotely practical? There is no straightforward recipe for the care of ICU patients. It requires multiple practitioners orchestrating different combinations of tasks for different conditions, matters that cannot be controlled by simple forcing functions. Plus, people are individual in ways that rockets are not. They are complex. No two pneumonia patients are identical. Even with the same bacteria, the same cough and shortness of breath, the same low oxygen levels, the same antibiotic, one patient might get better and the other might not. A doctor must be prepared for unpredictable turns that checklists seem completely unsuited to address. Medicine contains the entire range of problems: the simple, the complicated, and the complex, and there are often times when a clinician has to just do what needs to be done. Forget the paperwork. Take care of the patient. I have been thinking about these matters for a long time now. I want to be a good doctor for my patients. And the question of when to follow one's judgment and when to follow protocol is central to doing the job well or to doing anything else that is hard. You want people to make sure to get the stupid stuff right. Yet you also want to leave room for craft and judgment and the ability to respond to unexpected difficulties that arise along the way. The value of checklists for simple problems seems self-evident. But can they help avert failure when the problems combine everything from the simple to the complex? I happened across an answer in an unlikely place. I found it as I was just strolling down the street one day. It was a bright January morning in 2007. I was on my way to work, walking along the sidewalk from the parking lot to the main entrance of my hospital, when I came upon a new building under construction for our medical center. It was only a skeleton of steel beams at that point, but it stretched 11 stories high, occupied a full city block, and seemed to have arisen almost overnight from the empty lot that had been there. I stood at one corner watching a construction worker welding a joint as he balanced on a girder 4 stories above me. And I wondered, how did he and all his co-workers know that they were building this thing right? How could they be sure that it wouldn't fall down? The building was not unusually large. It would provide 150 private hospital beds, so we could turn our main tower's old, mostly shared rooms into private beds as well, and 16 fancy new operating rooms, which I was especially looking forward to, nothing out of the ordinary. I would bet that in the previous year dozens of bigger buildings had been constructed around the country. Still, this one was no small undertaking, as the hospital's real estate manager later told me. The building, he said, would be 350,000 square feet in size, with 3 stories underground in addition to the 11 stories above. It would cost $360 million, fully delivered, and require 3,885 tons of steel, 13,000 yards of concrete, 19 air handling units, 16 elevators, 1 cooling tower, and 1 backup emergency generator. The construction workers would have to dig out 100,000 cubic yards of dirt and install 64,000 feet of copper piping, 47 miles of conduit, and 95 miles of electrical wire, enough to reach Maine. And, oh yeah, I thought to myself, this thing couldn't fall down. When I was 11 years old, growing up in Athens, Ohio, I decided I was going to build myself a bookcase. My mother gave me $10, and I biked down to the C&E hardware store on Richland Avenue. With the help of the nice man with hairy ears behind the counter, I bought 4 pine planks, each 8 inches wide and 3/4 of an inch thick and cut to 4 feet long. I also bought a tin of stain, a tin of varnish, some sandpaper, and a box of common nails. I lugged the stuff home to our garage. I carefully measured my dimensions. Then I nailed the 2 cross planks into the 2 side planks and stood my new bookcase up. It looked perfect. I sanded down the surfaces, applied the stain and soon the varnish. I took it to my bedroom and put a half dozen books on it. Then I watched the whole thing fall sideways like a drunk tipping over. The two middle boards began pulling out. So I hammered in a few more nails and stood the bookcase up again. It tipped over the other way. I banged in some more nails, this time coming in at an angle, thinking that would do the trick. It didn't. Finally, I just nailed the damn thing directly into the wall. And that was how I discovered the concept of bracing. So as I looked up at this whole building that had to stand up straight even in an earthquake, puzzling over how the workers could be sure they were constructing it properly, I realized the question had two components. First, how could they be sure that they had the right knowledge in hand? Second, how could they be sure that they were applying this knowledge correctly? Both aspects are tricky. In designing a building, experts must take into account a disconcertingly vast range of factors: the makeup of the local soil, the desired height of the individual structure, the strength of the materials available, and the geometry, to name just a few. Then, to turn the paper plans into reality, they presumably face equally Byzantine difficulties making sure that all the different tradesmen and machinery do their job the right way, in the right sequence, while also maintaining the flexibility to adjust for unexpected difficulties and changes. Yet builders clearly succeed. They safely put up millions of buildings all over the globe. And they do so despite the fact that construction work has grown infinitely more complex over the decades. Moreover, they do it with a frontline workforce that regards each particular job from pile driving to wiring intensive care units much the way doctors, teachers, and other professionals regard their jobs, as specialized domains in which others should not interfere. I paid a visit to Joe Salvia, the structural engineer for our new hospital wing. I told him I wanted to find out how work is done in his profession. It turned out I'd come to the right person. His firm, McNamara/Salvia, has provided the structural engineering for most of the major hospital buildings in Boston since the late 1960s, and for a considerable percentage of the hotels, office towers, and condominiums as well. It did the structural rebuilding of Fenway Park, the Boston Red Sox baseball team's 36,000-seat stadium, including the Green Monster, its iconic 37-foot, home run-stealing left field wall. And the firm's particular specialty has been designing and engineering large, complicated, often high-rise structures all over the country. Salvia's tallest skyscraper is an 80-story tower going up in Miami. In Providence, Rhode Island, his firm built a shopping mall that required one of the largest steel mill orders placed on the East Coast, more than 24,000 tons. It is also involved in perhaps the biggest commercial project in the world, the Meadowlands Xanadu Entertainment and Sports Complex in East Rutherford, New Jersey, which will house a stadium for the New York Giants and New York Jets football teams, a 3,000-seat music theater, the country's largest movie multiplex, and the Snow Park, the nation's first indoor ski resort. For most of the past several years, McNamara/Salvia's engineers have worked on 50 to 60 projects annually, an average of one new building a week. And they have never had a building come even close to collapsing. So I asked Salvia at his office in downtown Boston how he has ensured that the buildings he works on are designed and constructed right. Joe Salvia is 61, with almost no hair, a strong Boston accent, and a cheery, "Take your time, how about some coffee" manner that I didn't expect from an engineer. He told me about the first project he ever designed, a roof for a small shopping plaza. He was just out of college, a 23-year-old kid from East Cambridge, which is not exactly where the Harvard professors live. His father was a maintenance man and his mother worked in a meat processing plant, but he was good in school and became the first member of his family to go to college. He went to Tufts University planning to become a doctor. Then he hit organic chemistry class. They said, "Here, we want you to memorize these formulas," he explained. I said, "Why do I have to memorize them if I know where the book is?" They said, "You want to be a doctor? That's what you have to do in medicine, you have to memorize everything." That seemed ridiculous to me. Plus I wasn't good at memorizing. So I quit. But Salvia was good at solving complex problems. He tried to explain how he solves quadratic equations in his head, though all I managed to pick up was that I'd never before heard someone say quadratic equation in a Boston accent. I also liked the concept of creating, he said. As a result, he switched to engineering, a scientific but practical field, and he loved it. He learned, as he put it, basic statics and dynamics, F equals ma, and he learned about the chemistry and physics of steel, concretes, and soil. But he'd built nothing when he graduated with his bachelor's degree and joined Sumner Shane, an architectural engineering firm that specialized in structural engineering for shopping centers. One of its projects was a new shopping mall in Texas, and Salvia was assigned the roof system. He found he actually understood a lot about how to build a solid roof from his textbooks and from the requirements detailed in building codes. I knew from college how to design with structural steel, how to use beams and columns, he said.